Book of Esther reminds us that attempts to destroy the Jewish people are not new. They're as old as Scripture itself. No wonder, then, that such honor is given to a young Jewish woman who almost single-handedly saved her people from slaughter. Esther's story also provides us with a fascinating study in what some call situation ethics. Esther began her acquaintance with power as a victim of sexual dominance. She was just another young plaything for the appetites of the Persian king. Hardly the place for a nice Jewish girl. But while she may have had no choice in that, she never forgot her real identity, and later, when her people were threatened, she was as adept a practitioner of intricate politics as any of the males who dominated that royal court. Sidney White Crawford explores this absorbing story with us now.
The Book of Esther, as you've discovered in your preparation, is one of the most exciting stories in the Old Testament. It has all the elements of a great novel: intrigue, romance, suspense, and a happy ending. All readers can relate to the Book of Esther as a human story and can sympathize with its main characters Esther and Mordecai. In the Jewish canon, Esther falls into the division known as the Ketuvim, or writings. This division contains various types of literature, for example, Psalms and Proverbs, all of which are didactic in nature. That is, they are meant to teach a lesson. Within the writings, Esther is also part of the Megillot, or 5 scrolls, the 5 short books of Esther, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. This is a relatively late grouping, meant to reflect the order of the festivals at which each of these books is read in its entirety. The Book of Esther is the festival legend for the Feast of Purim, as we shall see when we reach the end of the book. The Book of Esther opens in the court of the Persian king Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is usually identified with the Emperor Xerxes, who ruled the Persian Empire from 485 to 464 BCE. The court is located in Susa, one of the 3 Persian capitals. This setting gives the book an air of historicity, but whether or not the events narrated in the book actually happened is open to question. The story begins with a banquet given by the king for all his officials. Banquets are an important structuring device in the Book of Esther. This first banquet is followed immediately by a second banquet, given by the king for the people of Susa only, thus narrowing the focus of the story. Within the second banquet, a third banquet is described, given by Queen Vashti for the women. The description of these banquets is lavish, hinting at the opulence and decadence of the Persian court. The next episode describes the downfall of Queen Vashti, who refuses to appear at the banquet when summoned by the drunken king. The character of Vashti is meant to contrast with Esther's. Vashti is self-willed and disobedient, negative traits for a woman in the patriarchal world of the narrator. Her disobedience is punished by banishment. The episode is marked by bombast and self-importance on the part of the king and his counselors, and by a tone of ironic humor on the part of the author. This ironic tone continues throughout the book. Episode 2 begins with the king's realizing the consequences of Vashti's banishment. He needs a new queen, and he will get one by holding what is in essence a sex contest with himself as the judge. Chapter 2, verses 5 through 7 introduces us to the heroes of the story, Mordecai, an exiled Jew, and his cousin and ward, Esther. They are members of the large community of exiled or diaspora Jews found throughout the Persian Empire. Esther becomes part of the king's harem. We should note that as a subject of the king, she would have had no choice but to obey his orders. She is more fortunate than the other women who are condemned to be shut in the harem for the rest of their lives. Esther wins the king's favor and is made queen. Esther's ability to please those in positions of power is an important foreshadowing of her later heroic role. Note that Esther conceals her Jewish identity. This plot device is important, but would have been impossible if Esther were observing the dietary laws, as Daniel and his companions did. The episode closes with the fourth banquet, which signals the reversal of roles between Vashti and Esther. Vashti is now humbled, and Esther instead is queen. Chapter 3 introduces the fourth major character, Haman the Agagite. Agagite refers to Agag, the king of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, 1-9. The Amalekites are the hereditary enemies of Israel, and King Saul loses his throne for his failure to destroy Agag and the Amalekites. Since Mordecai is a descendant of the family of Saul, he and Haman are bound to be enemies. This history is the only plausible reason for Mordecai's otherwise inexplicable refusal to bow to Haman. The events of the plot move swiftly from now on. Haman determines to destroy all the Jews in retaliation for Mordecai's snub, and in 3:7 cast Pur, or the lot, in order to determine the auspicious day. This casting of Pur becomes the origin of the festival name Purim, although the event may be fictional. Haman receives permission from the king to destroy this unidentified people and sends out the order. Since we know from the earlier Vashti episode that the king's decrees are irreversible, presumably this one is as well. The episode closes with the fifth banquet. Notice that this time the citizens of Susa do not share in the celebration. Chapter 4 is a pivotal scene in the story. When Mordecai sends a message by Hathach urging Queen Esther to use her position to save her people, she refuses, pointing out that she herself risks death if she appears unsummoned before the king. Mordecai's response strikes the strongest theological note in Esther, which, until now, has had no religious content at all. If you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. The word quarter in 4:14 may or may not be an indirect reference to God, but Mordecai certainly is affirming, although in a roundabout way, a belief in a divine providence which will save the Jews. Esther then calls for the only possibly religious action in the book, the fast. This fast contrasts sharply with the preceding and following banquets. Divine providence does appear to be at work, for Esther is successful. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. She is successful in the same way she was earlier, by pleasing those in power and working within the Persian court system. In this way, she is a powerful role model for Jews living in exile and under foreign oppression. The king, with Haman, consents to attend her banquet, the sixth in the book. Although the reader may expect Esther to make her request at her first banquet, the author delays the action by instead having Esther ask for another, seventh banquet. These two banquets, however, are interrupted by what is surely the funniest episode in the story, the humiliation of Haman. This episode begins the reversal of roles that takes place between Haman and Mordecai. Chapter 7, verse 3, through chapter 8, verse 2, reports the resolution of the story. Esther reveals her Jewish identity, Haman is exposed as a wicked schemer, and the king's eyes are finally opened. Haman falls from power into death, and Mordecai rises to take his place, thus completing their role reversals. This reversal is celebrated by a festival, an eighth banquet, a celebration in which both the citizens of Susa and the Jews participate. The problem of thwarting the king's irreversible edict of destruction is tackled by allowing the Jews to defend themselves. The necessity for self-defense by the Jews, even after the downfall of Haman, indicates a strong undercurrent of anti-Semitism in the Persian Empire. The large number of dead reported and Esther's call for another day of fighting have led to charges of bloodthirstiness. But we must remember that these acts were undertaken in self-defense, which means that those at the other end of the sword were trying to kill Jews. The holiday in 9:17 through 19, celebrated with feasting by the Jews, is also the occasion for the 9th and 10th banquets of the book. Purim, which becomes a permanent festival by royal decree, does not celebrate the destruction of the Jews' enemies, but rather their own rest and relief from the threat of destruction. Purim is probably a festival that arose in the diaspora community, where the threat of destruction became all too familiar to Jews in the coming centuries. So the Book of Esther is a beacon of hope, and Purim becomes a beloved Jewish holiday, second in rejoicing only to that great festival of deliverance, the Passover. The Book of Esther envisions a world in which Jew and Gentile can live together in peace and harmony, each working to serve the common good. It achieves this vision through the use of humor and irony, which hide a serious purpose. We are supposed to chuckle our way through Esther. It is a funny book. But at the end, we are also supposed to understand how God's purpose is worked out in that very human Persian world that looks so much like our own.
This story should be a lesson for those today who still think women are no more than the playthings of male power, and also a reminder of the many, many times when persecutions have been directed against Esther's people, the Jews.